I'd like to begin by sharing a couple of stories with you this morning. The first was from my internship congregation. I interned at Trinity-Live Lutheran in Racine, Wisconsin. I followed an intern who had been there for 2 years, and that was the first intern that the congregation had ever had. To say the least, they fell in love with him and he with them. He was a single man, and so he enjoyed eating with the senior citizens. He enjoyed working with the youth, and he spent a lot of time there. When they asked him to stay on a second year, he said, gratefully accepted, and was there for 2 years. I followed him, and it was tough coming into a congregation following someone who was well loved. I remember having trouble with the youth group. They really didn't want to have much to do with me. But what made matters worse was during the year he came back at numerous times, including at Christmas time. And then finally, in the spring of the year, when it seemed like I was getting myself established, he decided he was going to be ordained in that congregation. And so the only thing I heard about all summer was the ordination of Mike. The second story comes from the first parish I served, and that was St. John's Lutheran in Hosmer. I became pastor at St. John's August 15th. It was less than 2 weeks later, a member of that congregation, a young woman, had scheduled her marriage. Because she scheduled her marriage when they were without a pastor, she had asked the previous pastor if he would be willing to marry them, her and her husband. And of course, he accepted. And so when I arrived, he came back to do the wedding. The mother of the bride, who was very actively involved in the congregation, felt that I needed to participate. And so she asked me if I would. It probably would have been better off if I hadn't. But here I was, a new pastor, serving this congregation, and I really felt like a fifth heel. This former pastor came in, took over, told me what to do, and gave me a 2-bit part, which I believe was simply reading the scripture reading. I think it would have been better if I would have simply declined. Not only that, but he continued to return to the congregation on numerous occasions during that first year I was there, even though he was serving as pastor at another church. I share this because both of those incidents, I believe, was a break in pastoral ethics. There is such a thing as pastoral ethics. Most lay people are not aware of it, but it is well known among clergy. 2 weeks ago when I went over to visit Janice's cell, and I was visiting with Pastor Lori because I had borrowed a couple of hymn books from the church when I was filling in there and finally got around to returning them. And she was asking about where I was going to worship and some different things. And we got talking on the topic of pastoral ethics. And she says, oh, we just had that discussion at our last pastors' gathering, Methodist pastors' gathering, about proper pastoral ethics. And so I want to share with you a little bit about pastoral ethics this morning. And the purpose of pastoral ethics is to, first of all, make clear that I am no longer serving as your pastor. And I think that needs to be made very, very clear. But second of all, it is to make it a lot easier for the new pastor to come in and establish herself without being interfered from me. And so that means a couple of things. One of the things that has always been suggested by our church is that a pastor not retire in the last place where he has served. Which is why Margie and I have always talked about building our house in the Black Hills. Unfortunately, that's not done yet, so I'm still going to be around Chamberlain for another 6 months. But that brings me to the second point, that I will no longer be worshiping with you. And again, there's an important reason for that, because if I would show up again and again on Sunday morning, there still would be that allegiance. People would be wanting to talk to me about pastoral things, and it would really hinder the new pastor from coming in and becoming pastor and establishing herself. And the third thing is that I am no longer able to do pastoral acts. And so if you ask me, can you baptize my child, I will have to say, no, you have a new pastor who will have to do that. If you ask me to come and marry you, I'll have to say, well, no, I can't. Sorry, but you'll have to ask the new pastor. If you come and say, well, you know, my mom or dad were really close to you, can't you come and do their funeral? And again, I'll have to say, well, I'm sorry, I will not be able to do the funeral. You have a new pastor to do that. I know that sounds like a form of rejection, and I want you to hear this morning that it's not that I'm rejecting you. But there is a difference between being a friend and being a pastor. I am no longer going to be your pastor. However, that does not hinder me from continuing to be your friend and maintaining contact with you. Last summer, Ron changed our Facebook page, Trinity Facebook page, from that of a personal account, which it should never have been, to that of a commercial account. And with that, I started my own Facebook page. Since then, 5 people from Trinity has asked to be my friends, and I befriended them. You can look up who they are, but I'll let you know because it's kind of an interesting mix of people who the 5 are. So far, Kay Hines, Del Weavick, Ron Lurs, Connor Graves, and Maria Birch have asked to be my friend. So like I said, it's a kind of an interesting group. If you want to be my friend and send me a friend request, I will befriend you. If you invite me to your wedding, chances are that Marge and I will attend, but I'm not going to be up in front marrying you. We'll be sitting with the rest of your friends out in the congregation. If you ask me to do the funeral for your father or mother, again, I will have to decline. And yet, if that person meant a lot to me, I'll show up at the funeral home for visitation. I might show up for the funeral, but again, I will be sitting out as a friend in the congregation, not doing the service itself. And I think that needs to be made clear, that you no longer have to call me your pastor anymore. I'm no longer your pastor. You have a new pastor that's going to be coming. And people wonder, well, why are those so strict? Lawyers aren't asked to leave town. Doctors aren't asked to leave town. Other professional teachers don't leave town when they retire from teaching. Why is it that pastors have these rules and regulations? And I think the main reason is because with a pastor, you become emotionally involved, more so than any other profession. A pastor is there at the high points and low points of life, at those very emotional times. And you can't help but become emotionally involved with the pastor. The pastor is there at the birth of a child and at the baptism of a child, at a marriage, so it's really exciting times. The pastor is there ministering to you when you face difficulties, and there's been all kinds of divorces since I've been here, and there's been all kinds of funerals that I have conducted. Those are very emotional times, and the pastor is there to support and care for you. And so there is that emotional attachment that is with the pastor, and that's hard to break away from. And with that comes that grieving process. With the emotion comes the process of grieving, of saying goodbye. And there will be grieving among you. That grieving is a natural part of departure, of saying goodbye. There will be feelings of anger, feelings of abandonment, of blame, of guilt in others. And sometimes those are expressed in very appropriate ways, and other times they're expressed in inappropriate ways. But there is those that grieve. You know, I'm going through my own grief. You know, I've had 14 and a half great years with you, and I'm going to miss a lot of things here. I'm going to miss all those treehouse children. They were so lively, and I enjoyed giving them a hard time and seeing them, and I'm going to miss them. I'm going to miss getting up on Sunday morning and preaching, something that I've received a lot of fulfillment from. I'm going to miss the Saturday night service, especially that informal service that was fit my style of ministry. I enjoyed that. I'll miss the potlucks. I'll miss the Wowsome Wednesday. And I'll miss confirmation. Even though the class this year has been a little bit of a pain to deal with, I still enjoy my weekly confirmation, my interaction with the young people. I've always enjoyed that. And I'm going to miss that. There's things I'm going to miss. And yet there is also some joys. Joys that I'm looking forward to. Spending more time with the grandkids. Spending time building a new house. Or at least watching it built, I should say. Not going to be too much actively involved. Being able to pursue some of the hobbies. And sleeping in on Sunday morning. It's one of the luxuries that you have, but I've never had. At least not for the last 38 years. So there's some joys there. And I think the same thing is with you. You know, there's that sorrow of saying goodbye to me, and that you're experiencing that. But there's also the joy of looking forward to a new pastor coming and being welcoming to her and seeing how she's going to work out. So there's some excitement there and sorrow. It kind of reminds me of the text that we had to sign. As I said, it's not one of my favorite texts to hear about a bunch of baby boys being killed. But I think it points out the reality of life. You know, Christmas comes and there is that joy of celebrating the birth of a child. And yet, in the midst of the joy, there is also the sorrow and the heartaches that we deal with, of death and pain. I think that's kind of what I'm going through, the joys and the sorrows of saying goodbye, and I'm sure that's what many of you are experiencing also. As I leave, I do believe that it is a good time for me to leave. I think it's time for you to begin a new step in your ministry. And one of the reasons I mention that is because of the number of young people that have been attracted to Wowsome Wednesday. Those of you who were here at the program saw that there were over 150 people here. We ran out of popcorn bowls, more than we've ever had for a Sunday school program that I can remember. We gave out 15 Bibles to preschoolers and kindergartners. 15. Think of that. And almost more than half of them are not members. There's all kinds of potential among young people, and I think it's time for a younger pastor who can relate to the young people to come and bring them into the fold. Something that, I'm probably not one of my gifts, because I have a hard time understanding what a lot of the young people are going through, and some of the things frustrate me. So I think I'm excited about this. I'm also believe it's the right time because there is a good secretary in place. And I say this because I can't help but remember when I came. Elaine Furry was secretary, and what a blessing and great help she was to me. It helped me to become acquainted, helping me not only with the church, but with the community. Whenever I had a question, I could go to her. And even to this day, Rod and Elaine are still good friends, and a lot of that was because of the help that she gave when I first came. I was a little concerned this last summer when Bonnie retired, or quit, I should say. We started our own business, and there was no one that was interested. The candidates that we had, or the applicants that we had, were less than desirable, and I was really concerned that we have somebody in place when the new pastor comes that could fulfill the same function that Elaine did for me. And I'm pleased with how Maria has worked out. She's a person who knows the Synod staff and understands the work of the church, and someone that can be of help. I think another thing that excites me about Maria is that, as you know, one of my concerns throughout my ministry here has been mission. Not only local mission, but state, national, and international mission. It's something that I've emphasized and again and again. And I think Maria has that same interest, and so I see that as being continued as I leave. But also, Maria is very efficient. In the past, and I'm not putting down of the other secretaries, they've all been wonderful people and have had their own gifts, but it seemed like when I needed an article written for the newsletter, I would have to write it, or it really didn't get done. And it's been fun just to say, Maria, can you write an article about this? And that's her gift. She's a good writer, and I've been using that. And it's been wonderful to have her do the research and write, and it's taken pressure off me. So I believe here's another reason that the church is ready to move on to its next stage, because you have the staff in place to do it. As I conclude, I just want to say a few words of thanks. First of all, thanks for all of your support. It's been marvelous. Just this last week, a couple of things have happened. I put out on my email devotion that this was going to be the last devotion. I couldn't believe how many people responded, not only thanking me, but telling me positive comments how much those devotions have meant. As I was cleaning out my desk, I found all these notes that people had left, complimenting me on my sermons and how thoughtful and how important they were. That's just been wonderful. It's not something that just happened this last week, but it's been an important part of my ministry. I faced some difficulties. My wife and I faced some difficulties as we ministered with you. Our son broke his back. I had my bout with cancer. I had a lot of deaths in my family, including the death of my father and over a dozen aunts, uncles, and cousins. And yet you've been there reminding me of your support and care. I don't think I'll ever forget. After my surgery and cancer, when I was recovering at home, and this event just sticks out in the top of my mind, the choir coming over and caroling for me on the front porch, and how meaningful that was. And what a joy it was to hear that they would take the time not only to go and sing for the nursing home, but they would stop by and sing for me. Of course, I've loved music, and I so appreciated that. But that's just an indication of the support that I've had during my years here. Finally, thank you for your prayers. I don't remember ever serving another congregation where I've had so many people coming and reminding me that, we're praying for you, or I pray for you. And you don't know how much that means, because I am a great believer in prayer. I think it's a wonderful way of ministering, and knowing that you are praying for me was special. As I'm leaving, just know that I will continue to pray for you. 4 weeks ago yesterday, you interviewed Pastor Lisa, and ever since she has accepted your contract to serve for 5 months, I've been remembering her in my prayers, and I've been remembering you, the member of Trinity, in my prayers. That this will be a smooth transition, and that the ministry that has been going on here for 60 years might continue. Again, thank you for 14 and almost a half great years together. I will miss you, but I will continue to think about you.